There we go. I think I finally got us live. Sorry about that, everybody. I was trying to get a new system in place, so it took me a while there, but we are live now. And thank you guys for joining us. If you have questions, don't forget, you can enter them in the chat. We're here to answer them for you. So the Power Platform Share is all about 3 MVPs who just like to share stuff. So my name is Belinda Allen. I am one of the MVPs. And we have with us Mariano. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Belinda. My name is Mariano Gomez. I'm a Microsoft BizApps MVP, also a lover of the Power Platform.
Woohoo! And then finally we have our dear friend, Mr. Steve Endow. Steve?
Hello, I'm Steve Endow. I'm in Los Angeles, and I am an MVP in business applications as well. I've been focusing on Dynamics GP for many years, and I'm now working with Business Central and Power Apps and Flow and Azure.
And as you can tell, he has the voice of a radio announcer.
Yes, he does.
I have the audio set up, so this is the got my microphone here. So
there you go. I gotta get me one of those things to be as cool as you are.
That's right. That's right. I have my blue snowball, but which is I think yours is a Yeti. Is that right, Steve?
No, this is called the Shure SM7B. It's a XLR studio mic.
Anything that starts with Shure, you know, it's pretty sure that you're gonna sound good.
That's right. That's right.
Love it.
And for those of you who have been to our share before, this is all about us. It kind of started as us sharing with each other what we've been doing in the Power Platform world. And it hasn't evolved one iota since. It's still us. We like to share with each other, and we just kind of open up this sharing capabilities with anyone who's willing to listen. So we love learning, and we love sharing. So let's get started. Steve, you had a couple things you were going to show. Why don't you show us one of them now?
Sure. Okay, so let me click on share here. One moment. See if I can get this to work again. And display. Okay, can you see my screen? See a browser?
Yes, we
sir.
see a scan receipt.
Okay, so this started from, this is a prototype, just kind of a prototype and demo for a customer. They had a mandate. They'd previously been submitting expenses related to court cases, and they would have certain expenses related to some legal case. They would submit those and get compensated. Well, there are some new regulations in certain states that require them to submit copies of all of their receipts now, which I guess this is different than what they were doing in the past. So all of a sudden they had an imminent deadline that required that over 50 people in their organization submit copies of the receipts to these many different jurisdictions for the legal cases. And they didn't have a solution. So I pulled this together in a few hours to demonstrate what the Power Platform could do. And I'm using my webcam right now, so you're not seeing an image here, but the concept is that Power Apps can easily embed a camera control on a mobile device and allow you to take images of receipts. And so by tapping on the image, it would scan the receipt and allow you to record the different properties or different elements for this given expense. So this is just a mock-up showing description, what case this is for, what the amount, and what type of category. And these are all customizable, obviously. The user would fill this out. After scanning the receipt, fill this out, click on Save, and then they could go back and scan a new receipt. So let me switch to some screenshots just to demonstrate it here. And I'll just maximize this. So here you see a simple receipt. It gets scanned, paper and envelopes. You can fill all this out. And in about 4 hours, I was able to pull this together. Now, I learned a few interesting things in this process. Um, the first was, okay, I have this image. I can collect this information pretty simply. How do I store this? And Mariano, let me know if you know of a better way, but my understanding is that currently it is not the easiest thing to do in Power Apps to store something like a file attachment or an image attachment as a separate file. And so my understanding is there are a few workarounds. So what I did is, just for simplicity's sake of this demo, I use SharePoint as the repository for this data. And one of the workarounds that I found is Power Apps let you convert an image to a base 64 string. And very simple to do that. And the workaround is you can store that in SharePoint as a text field. So you don't have to deal with file attachments, image attachments, anything fancy. And this was super easy to do once I figured it out. So in a few hours, I was able to show the customer how they could build a Power App, collect receipt images, and store them in SharePoint. And of course, once this data is in SharePoint, that's the hard part. You've collected the data from your 50+ employees. You can now review it, approve it, route it, whatever you need to do within SharePoint. And you can use Flow, you can use other mechanisms, email, to do that. But the hard part was collecting that information. So that was a quick prototype that I did recently.
You know, so putting that into SharePoint makes me wonder or question. Well, I love the SharePoint list, but from what I understand, Power Apps has some problems with SharePoint lists when you hit a couple thousand records. So, I mean, like 2,000 records, it's pretty low. And Mariano, maybe you have a little bit more information on that, but I wonder what, how well it would hold up tracking all of these. Or, I mean, I guess you could use it. You might be able to use, oh, I don't know how you would do it.
No,
I was thinking about
that's a
Flow
good point.
moving it to SQL.
Yeah, so SharePoint, aside from the current integration with Power Apps and SharePoint, I normally wouldn't consider SharePoint an ideal data repository. So ideally, you'd probably want to push this off to an Azure SQL database, something like that. What is nice about this setup is it's great for prototyping. And maybe you prototype here, maybe you do some trial tests, you work out the kinks. But I would agree, if you're going to have high volume, it probably makes sense to push this off to a more capable database. But Mariano, have you done a project with SharePoint as the repository? Did we lose Mariano?
I don't know. It sounds like we did. So we seem to lose him once every time we share. So maybe he's just bugging out early. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, so we may have lost him, but we'll try and get him back. And Belinda, do you want to try messaging him, just in case?
Yes, I will. I'm going to do that right now.
And so one of the interesting limitations that I encountered when I first did this is I was scanning the receipts and I thought everything was fine. But then when I looked at the images closely, I realized that Power Apps by default, or currently, the camera control is only able to capture a 640 by 480 image. I believe that was the resolution. So it's a pretty low resolution image, and it wasn't enough to read the text of a receipt, let alone scan it. And I found on the Power Apps community suggestions or feature suggestions forum, there were many people who were asking to have a higher quality image capture, or at least the option to control the image resolution. So maybe some people only need 640 by 480, but other people might need 1 or 2 megapixel or higher resolution. And so people were asking for higher resolution and the ability to control the resolution on a per app basis. So that was one limitation that I found. This prototype kind of worked, but it would not be acceptable for a final solution given the low resolution of the image capture. So the workaround apparently...
With that kind of resolution, if you took an image of like an invoice that was a full page invoice with a lot of detail, would you be able to zoom in and read it?
Absolutely not. So you can see here, let me just just this receipt kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like. You can see, you can kind of make out that it's a Walmart receipt, but you're unable to read the text when you zoom in. So that was one issue. So the workaround currently, my understanding is you take an image, you take a photo with the smartphone camera, save it to the camera roll, and then there is a technique to attach an image from within Power Apps. And that is the current workaround in order to get a full resolution image. But I didn't go into that for the prototype, and I don't know if that would be an acceptable workflow for this type of application. Obviously, that's a couple extra steps, pros and cons of that approach, but that's my understanding as of when I did this demo. And then obviously we talked about the SharePoint potential limitation there, so pros and cons. Now, the great thing about SharePoint is it's easy to import and it's very accessible by an end user. Once you push things to SQL, you have to think about how other end users, approvers, administrators, workflow users are going to access that data. It's more difficult, in my opinion, to expose that SQL data than it is to expose this data in SharePoint. So it would be fantastic if SharePoint were able to handle a high workload, but that's a good point, something I didn't look into carefully.
Yeah, I love the SharePoint, the simplicity of the SharePoint list as far as writing to and moving things around. But yeah. And then Carrie also put a notice on here that you could also save to Azure Blob.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so Azure Blob storage, that might be another option. But I'm wondering whether that is necessarily any easier than Azure SQL. So the Blob might be able to store the image, but you still have metadata for your receipts in this case. So, you know, once you go that direction, how do you expose that to users who need to review and approve and route these receipts? I didn't explore how I would do that. This was just kind of the first step of just the receipt capture piece. And
so
once oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Carrie a question. Maybe he could write the answer down. So if you're suggesting an Azure Blob, would you also be thinking of Azure SQL to store the metadata for that blob and to have a connection there? Okay, go ahead, Steve, while he answers that.
Okay. I'll just type it as well in the chat.
Okay.
Okay. And so once I demoed this, we kind of discussed some of the technical challenges and moving forward if this were to be used. But then we got to the licensing catch. And this organization, although they do use Dynamics GP, they do not seem to be a big user of other Microsoft products and services, strangely. So on the desktop, they use Macs. I think they use VMware for servers. I don't think they use any Office 365. I don't even know if they use Office on the desktop, but they do not have any Office 365 subscriptions. They don't use any Azure services. So when I mentioned that this would require licensing for Power Apps and it's a subscription basis and they'd have to get it for 50+ users, they seem to quickly lose interest in this solution. So I'm curious how others deal with that conversation. But this organization, when I mentioned Office 365 and Power Apps licenses, they kind of said, oh, yeah, well, that's going to cost us a lot of money, and et cetera. So that was the second challenge that I encountered with this conversation.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. And before we
Yes.
tag you in, Mariano, I want to read Carrie's answer. He wrote, yes, he would use the Azure SQL, and he would tag a URL to a blob or a storage site for that image. And then you could save, save the image to a OneDrive shared folder, etc., and then access the URL. So we're talking, Mariano, I see you now too. That's good. So we're talking about the storage of this image, and the other thing that Steve brought up is not only the storage of the image, because I was talking about the fact that SharePoint has some limitations as far as how much it can hold without running into issues. And then Steve also brought up the resolution of the image itself being, what was it?
Yeah, I personally would use like an Azure storage blob. There's also very good use cases around that, where you could store off the images instead of even storing them in SQL Azure or anything like that. You can store them in a blob and just get a reference to that image that you can always pull up. I think our good friend Shane Young has a nice video covering storage of images in Azure in Azure Blob. So that's always an option.
But for a customer who doesn't want to invest in Office 365 because they're not already using it, but they want to use this, what other, Steve was wondering what other options are there?
I mean, there are a number of storage capabilities that are not necessarily SharePoint or OneDrive. You can use Dropbox. You can use just about any public storage repository that you can access via either a custom connector if they don't already have an existing connector in the platform for it. So, you don't always have to think about those. Yep, Flow can also be used. Definitely.
What was that, Steve?
You can invoke Flow and send this data pretty much anywhere you want. And so I think for this use case, Power Apps was an interesting potential solution. Mm-hmm. The alternative would have been some presumably very expensive, employee expense capture solution. And there are many of those, but given the tight deadline that they shared, I just offered this as a potential alternative. And they didn't go for it. I don't know what they eventually implemented, if anything, so far. But I thought this was an interesting opportunity to prototype something and see what the limitations and opportunities were.
But you tapped on something really, really cool about prototyping. If it's definitely a prototype, I'll go for SharePoint 1,000 times out of 1,001 because it's so quick to just get it up and running, get the connector going, get a quick list together. You don't really have to think about much when you're doing a prototype between Power Apps using SharePoint as a repository. So it's a quick proof of concept. 1,000 times I'll pick SharePoint.
Yeah, it worked great. It was the SharePoint piece was one of the easiest pieces.
Yep.
Okay. Very cool. So, very cool.
That's super cool.
And I had not thought about that before. You guys kind of got my thought processes going. Anything that can be written to with an API like Evernote or Dropbox, I guess, you could create a custom connector, and you could use any of that to store the data. Maybe next time we meet, I'll go through how I create custom connectors. And the cool thing is, once you create the custom connector, it is available for both applications at that point, Flow and Power.
Yep, it is.
So, Mariano, I'm going to switch over and make you the presenter. And
thank you.
You're a presenter now, so if you could show us what you've been doing.
I'll show you what I've been doing.
Yay.
Okay, let me know when you can see my screen.
We can see it.
Okay, so who of you have been playing with the new AI Builder, the preview version of AI Builder?
Does it count if I want to?
Yeah. Have you tried? Have you played with it?
No, I just
haven't played with this new one yet.
Well, let me show you some cool stuff, because you got me thinking about receipts when you were doing receipt, your receipt demo. And just so you know, AI Builder is a preview feature. They actually showed some of it off it was introduced at the recent MBAS here in Atlanta. I'm in Atlanta. So, because it's a preview feature, obviously you're not going to implement its capabilities in a production environment, but it's something that is food for thought. And the AI Builder itself has 4 different types of models that you can build. You can build a binary classification, is something this or is not, the typical one out there is it a hot dog or is not, right? You have the form processing, which is, that's the part that got me thinking of what you were doing, Steve. With form processing, you could probably train the vision service to recognize specific receipt templates. Obviously, the more and varied receipts you have, you're going to have to add more images of those receipts to train the model to recognize a specific receipt format. But that's one that I was thinking of for receipt handling. Then you have the object detection one. The object detection basically looks at it looks at a particular image, and based on how you train the model, it's able to identify that particular object based on the image that you're feeding in. And that's the one I'm going to focus on. But you also have the text classification one, which sort of, in essence, what you do is you basically feed text into the model, and you assign tags, and what it will do then is it will compute a percentage of certain tags based on the text that is reading. So, think of it as how SEOs work in Google Analytics or one of these things. When they look at your at scores for your website, that's a very similar concept that is being applied here. The one that I want to show today is object detection, because I think this is super cool. Now, all of these, just before I get started, all of these models are predicated on you using CDS as part of your data repository. So here I'm just going to have one called computer parts and accessories. And, pardon my spelling if I didn't spell it right, But this one in particular requires a couple things. It requires the object names, right? That's going to come from a CDS table. And it requires the images. So you basically feed images into the model for it to sort of start analyzing and determining what a particular object might be. So when you hit create here, this is going to go through and sort of provision the initial aspects of it. And part of what you need to do then is select the object names. All the object names, remember, that comes from your CDS database. So there's one down here called, if I'm not mistaken, items or something like that. Or might be, yep, a product actually. Right, and then you can choose the column that contains the information for that particular model that you're going to create. So let's say that's the name. I'll select the field, and now as you can see here, it lists the different elements, the different product names that are part of that table. Okay, so I'm going to choose, for example, wireless mouse. I'm going to choose, I don't know, a laptop. Don't start quizzing me between the difference between laptop and notebook, but hey, and I'm going to add something like I don't know, could be a keyboard, wireless keyboard. Okay, so I've selected these 3 objects for my model, or these 3 particular products for my model. Then I'm going to hit next. Then I don't want you to sit here and watch me add images. I'm just going to add a few, but the one thing that was very intriguing to me is the fact that they chose at least 15 images for each object that you want to detect. So, the one thing here is you're going to have to be very detailed on how many images you're going to feed for each object, which can then become a very time-consuming process, because if you read here, it says adding more than 50 images is what they recommend for the best result. And the best result means that the model, the more images you feed the model for a particular object, the more accurate that model becomes at identifying what that object is. Now,
those images actually train the model on what?
The images actually train the model. What I have not yet figured out is if it's a static training, meaning that it sort of approximates the object to the image that you read, or if the models do some sort of composition of those objects to then determine, that there is a pattern in the image that you're feeding. I don't know if that's clear, but it's sort of some AI concepts that I was trying to relate to. And I think the reason why you need to feed it so many images is so you can identify images, a particular object in whatever setting you put it. So one of the things that is recommended is that you take pictures of these images with all sort of different backgrounds, surrounded by other type of objects, surrounded by, in clutter so you can pick it out. Kind of like what you would do when you're training like a dog to identify a particular object or to become acquainted with a particular toy. So you put this toy in every sort of settings, and then eventually the dog will automatically pick out what that toy is, regardless of what setting you put it in. I think it's the best analogy I can come up with. So anyways, here you will click on Add Images. And I have a library of images that I actually selected here. I have those for the laptop, so I have all these images from laptops. I'm going to hit Open here, all right? And that's going to get fed in here. I'm going to upload more images. So this is going to upload those 16 images initially. But the bottom line is, if you have all those images in one place, that's sort of the best way to just pick them all up and have the model start to identify or import the images that you're doing. Because obviously then it becomes less taxing on the builder to deal with a stream of images. Just imagine if you had 20 objects and the minimum you were feeding were 50 images per object. So it starts to get really taxing at that point. Now you're dealing with 1,000 images for 20 objects. So you can quickly start to picture how time consuming this can become if you have separate folders for each image. So yep, go ahead.
A side note on when you're preparing images, Dmitry Katzin is a Business Central MVP. He has a great presentation on AI in use by the military, and he has an anecdote about how the military used AI to identify military vehicles such as tanks. And they discovered that after they trained their AI with thousands of images of different tanks, they would show it a picture of a tank and it would say, no, not a tank. It took them a few months to realize that when they trained their AI with images, all the images of tanks had blue sky. And so it was actually detecting the sky background and not the tank, because when they fed it an image of a tank without a sky background, it failed to detect the military vehicle.
Yeah, so those things are exactly kind of what I was talking about. Is really I am not per se a photographer, so I don't really do photographs pretty well. But in the scheme of things, if I had to train an AI model, what I would do is I would get one of those stands that rotate. In the cases where it's possible, obviously. Yeah. For smaller objects is definitely possible. So, but you can put one of those rotating stands, and then what you do is you put a camera that basically takes pictures at intervals while the object is rotating. But then you also have to, change the object to lay flat or upside down and things like that if you really want to get this superb accuracy with this stuff. But then the other thing here is once you choose the image, right, then you can start basically, this is the part that got me initially, but what you would do is you would then trace a rectangle around it, And then you can then say, you know, this guy right here is a laptop. Boom. Now it's tagged as a laptop. Then you proceed to your next image, right? So same thing here. This guy looks like a laptop, so we'll tag this as a laptop. Boom. Right? We'll say a laptop. So I think you get the point of what I'm trying to do right here. Now, because of time constraints, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to make.powerapps.com. I'm just going to remove this here. I'm not going to save any of it, so please bear with me. And I'm going to go and choose a builder or a model that I had already started working on. So let me just go and go to details here. And in the meantime, I'll show you three other things. So I have three objects. The three objects, same three objects that I selected before: a laptop, a wireless mouse, and a wireless keyboard. I have uploaded 48 images, so it's not like I've done a great job at training this model, but based on the predictions of the platform, it says that this model is already 80% accurate. So technically speaking, if I spent time trying to put this thing together and really dedicate, you know, my time as photographing as many variations of any particular laptop I want, or any particular mouse that I want, you know, then I can see this accuracy increase. So I can do a quick test here so I can show you guys. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag a picture that I've created from my desktop onto this model. So this is a quick test. This is the image I have uploaded. This is a Microsoft mouse, and if all goes well, I guess this is where the predictive analytics come into play, and it starts to try to identify that particular object. It says, hey, I'm 89% certain that this is a wireless mouse. So that's super cool. This is how things start to work. Steve, I know you and I had a conversation. I don't know if it was on Twitter or where it was, but yeah, you were asking, how do we do product subcategories? Then, so for example, if within wireless mouse now I want wireless mice, I want to have you know, the Microsoft mouse versus the Logitech mouse, and Logitech has 10 variations of their mouse and all different. That's where I think things start to get pretty hairy, because, you know, this implies that you now have to. This is not like photographing chairs, right, or photographing a tank. And to use the example you had, it sounds now like I am really getting into the nitty-gritty of basically product identification. And that's where I think some of the challenges will come into play, because now if you think about this way, if you have a Logitech mouse that has 10 variations of that thing, and Microsoft has another number of mice, you can then think about how many photographs are going to be involved into training a model around identifying a particular mouse pattern, if you want to call it somehow. So, you know.
And I mentioned I looked into this a few years ago. It was on the Azure image recognition system. I forgot what it was called, their AI platform. And I was wondering whether that could be used to identify a specific inventory item in your warehouse, say. And maybe it's this particular chair, this style with this upholstery and this color.
Yeah.
And during training, I quickly realized that, whoa, that would require a whole lot of images. And I didn't have sample images that could even approach that level. And so it might be able to identify a chair versus a table, but can it identify this specific model of chair?
Yeah.
That's possible. I'd love to know.
And that's exactly where I think the challenge comes into play. Can it do it? I'm sure. But now if you think of your typical inventory warehouse, where they have variations of a particular product by size, by color, even, you know, is it going to do that type of stuff? I don't know, you know. Yeah. And if it does it, then just imagine the degree of sophistication you need to have just to capture images for that particular object. And that to me is where sort of this paradigm breaks down a little bit. So what I had suggested to the Power Apps team is to have the ability to train a model on the fly. So for example, if an image is not recognized, give me the ability to auto-tag it while once the result is delivered back to you. But anyways, so that's one thing. So as you can see here now, this is perfectly capable of identifying a mouse. So let's see how we use that in an app. And I don't know how I'm running on time, but I'm going to try and do this to the best of my abilities. So I'm going to create a Canvas app here.
While you get started, two things popped into my mind that one that got me to thinking bizarrely, and the other one made me laugh. So the first one is, Steve, your story of Dmitry kind of cracked me up because Dmitry is Russian, and I don't know, there's just a story about tanks in Russia and collusion just all made me giggle. So
Don't go
we're
there.
not gonna go there, but it did make me laugh. So and Dmitry is a super nice guy. I really like him a lot. And the other thing is, based on the fact that it was requiring a minimum of 15 pictures, I started thinking about facial recognition software and what that means and what it's doing. So I don't know, just something to think about. That's pretty massive.
Yeah, and keep in mind that there is a face recognition service on Azure. I think it currently only identifies celebrities, but you can feed it sort of like the same concept like this. You can feed it additional images of other people that you want to identify. But anyways, the bottom line here is now I'm going to use the object detector, and here under AI Builder you have the business card reader, the form processor, and the object detector. That's the one I'm going to use. Okay. Now, because I already had my model published, that's the other thing. Once you train the model, the last step in doing that is publishing that model. So now it's exposed fully to Power Apps, but also to Flow, by the way. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's also computer parts here. I'm going to select that. Then it sort of inserts this nice detect, little applet here, control on the screen. But furthermore, what I'm going to do is when this is changed, when the property change here, so here I'm going to use the unchanged. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a set, I'm going to do a clear collect. So I can actually capture this, clear collect detected objects, comma, and then I'm going to say object detector 1 dot vision objects. Okay, so you can basically now assign this to a variable. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm then going to insert a gallery, and I think that we can use this one. And I'm going to simply go here and change this to select from, let me see what we have here, from sample heading, not sample heading. Oh, on the items, I'm sorry, I think I just missed the gallery itself here. The data source, I'm going to say, is from detected objects. So boom. Now, once I do get the item, I can say, show me the display name for that one, and this item that count is the second one that I would like. Okay. So good. Now we have our gallery. We have our objects being detected. The next thing to do is to basically put this to use. So if I go here and play this, let me see if this is going to work. I can then choose from my desktop the same image that I used. I'm going to open it, and let's see how that works.
Cool.
Come on, it's working.
Yeah.
So give it a second.
It appears that almost if you guys are not using collections in Power Apps, you should. It makes everything much easier.
Okay, so there we go. See, it detected a wireless mouse and it set the count here. So obviously, if I had an image with 10 wireless mouse, it would say, hey, you know, you have 10 wireless mice here, and here's the count for those 10 wireless mouse. But you know, think of practical applications of this. I know Kerry did a nice demo at one of the GPUG tech conference, or GP tech conferences up in Fargo. But just imagine this was available to you at the time you did your inventory control, inventory count thing. Yeah, you know, if you're counting widgets, how practical is this? I don't know. But if you're counting sizable objects and you can spread them sort of evenly across a surface, you know, this might not be a bad application for example, asset counting. Inventory, I don't know, depends what your inventory items are, but, you know, the larger the object, obviously the easier things become, from what I can tell. But if you have to count widgets, how practical is that? I don't know. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff I want you guys to walk away thinking from this. And by the way, that concludes my small presentation. So that's what I wanted to show you for today.
Cool. Very nice.
Yeah, thank you.
That is cool, and I'm trying to think of practical uses for that. I'm going to be thinking on that one.
Yeah, so, you know, as I said, like if I have to do an inventory of assets that are in an office, maybe that works. Maybe that's a good scenario. You can just go with your phone, snapping pictures of everything that you see around, and, you know, sort of creating a way to, you know, create a Power Apps that basically accumulates all those counts that you're seeing.
Right.
That's doable, right?
Fixed assets like inventory, you know, there's that very simple invention of the barcode, and you can have specific identification of assets or inventory with a specific barcode. They're numbered, and pretty hard to beat that. And Power Apps has a barcode scanner as well, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, as proposing it as an alternative to that might be an option. I don't know. As I said, I don't know how practical these things are. This is still in preview, keep in mind, so I'm sure it's going to come back with more capabilities by the time, if it ever goes live, if it ever goes production, which I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. You know, it's being touted as the next big thing for Power Apps. So, you know, finding those use cases is what's going to be, I guess that's our job, right? We're consultants, so ultimately, finding those use cases and presenting them to customers is exactly what's going to be the challenge.
So I'm right off the top of my head, I'm thinking about two different potential scenarios. One of them being where you have employee pictures in there and you're using it to verify the identity of employees to give something to, like a password or something. So employee verification, and then and patient verification if you're dealing with something that maybe requires HIPAA and you want to have an extra level of precaution there that that's somebody, I don't know, that's one thing that I'm thinking of. And then potentially another one might be just being able to identify customers themselves, so that you could see, you know, who's coming up and asking things. I don't know. There's a use case around there somewhere. I'm just trying to think about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope you guys like that.
Yeah, that was very cool.
Yeah.
Steve, we have 13 minutes. Do you have time to show your other thing in 13 minutes?
I've already shown mine. The prototype and just the discussion, the licensing was all I had today.
Okay, so I thought you had two. So okay, yep. And okay, so very cool. Then we'll go ahead and just wrap this up. Any closing thoughts that you guys might have on anything Power Platform? We'll start with you, Mariano.
Yes. you know, I walked away from MBOS. MBOS was less than a month ago. Just feeling more and more confident as to where this is going. I can see the pieces coming together. I can see all the aspects of the Power Platform really gelling together very well. The capabilities that are being built into Power Apps, the capabilities that are being built into Flow, and certainly Power BI, and the deep integration between those three platforms. And I feel ignorant because I don't know that we do enough with Power BI in our sessions. I think we've probably got to bring that in more at some point. But, you know, just looking at the level of integration is leading me to believe that although each one of these solutions are very good by themselves, you know, you would certainly be doing sort of a disservice to yourself in not considering the full-blown components as a solution. All solutions in one as a delivery mechanism. I just think, you know, there's so much potential in this that is beyond our wildest dreams. What you can create with this stuff, you know.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things that Mariano and I were talking about before this YouTube Live event was the Forrester Research Group, very well known, very well respected, has determined that using the Power Apps and Flow product, the return on investment is just a matter of a couple months, and it's like the return on investment is like 300 to 500%. It's costing money not to implement that. So something very, very, very important. So, and before I go to you, Steve already commented on it online, but Carrie, our lovely friend Carrie Hadley, added using the asset management collection that has barcodes visible in the picture, and then having AI find the barcode in the image and merging that data together. Yep, that's pretty smart. And Steve added, great idea, run object delete and barcode detection in the process. And he added, he has to admit that Power BI is cool. That's because we have an ongoing debate over Power BI and SSRS, and I can hear him laughing now. And I win. Power BI is the best. So, Steve, what about you? Closing thoughts?
Well, I think Power Apps and the Power Platform in general is new, and we're still trying to figure out ways to use it. But I think I'm not aware of any other competing product or platform that is similar, that allows you to quickly build an application, connect it to dozens of different data sources seamlessly with just a mouse click. And so I think that's very promising. It looks like an extremely powerful platform with a lot of capabilities. And the real question is, how can we use it and implement it in real-world business applications or high-value applications? And I think one of the key elements that makes it a killer app, both Power Apps, Flow, and other aspects of, say, the CDS platform, are the connectors. To be able to connect to 24 different platforms with the click of the mouse is phenomenal. It's amazing. You know, having done integrations, to integrate with other platforms via API, to have to code that, not a fun process. But to be able to
worrying about security, authentication, deployment of that stuff, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Yeah.
Failure notifications, it's just such a hassle. And when you look at the endless list of connectors in Power Apps and Flow, it is mind-blowing, including...
That's the secret sauce.
Yeah, effectively having Azure AI and ML in the background, but it's invisible to you. You just pull it up in Power Apps, click a few buttons, and it just does image recognition. This is groundbreaking stuff. Try doing that on another platform, and you'll see how quickly you run into a brick wall.
Yeah.
You are absolutely right, my friend. And next time, next month, I promise I'll do a custom connector and show you guys how I've created custom connectors that both read and write. And they're pretty easy to do. There's just a few gotchas, and once you get past the few gotchas, then you're in good shape. And so totally worth doing, because then anything that has an API can become a custom connector in both Power Apps and Flow, and so then there's no reason why you can't use that even as an integration tool between applications to read and write. And our beloved GP, I've written some of those, and I've used the eConnect stored procedures to use to write back in, and so do some cool things there. And anyhow,
and on that note, we are going to leave you guys thinking about all the stuff you can do.
That's right. Very cool. Thank you, my friends, for sharing today. That was pretty darn impressive, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks
Thanks
guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Oh, my pleasure. Bye.